Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garrett. Porfiry Petrovitch returned quickly. He became suddenly more jovial. Your party yesterday, brother, has left my head rather, and I'm out of sorts altogether. He began in quite a different tone, laughing to resume him. Was it interesting? I left you yesterday at the most interesting point. Who got the best of it? Oh, no one, of course. They got on to everlasting questions floated off into space. Only fancy, Rodya, what we got on to yesterday, whether there is such a thing as crime. I told you that we talked our heads off. What is there strange? It is an everyday social question, Raskolnikov answered casually. The question wasn't put quite like that, observed Porfiry. Not quite. That's true, Razumihin agreed at once, getting warm and hurried as usual. Listen, Rodion, and tell us your opinion. I want to hear it. I was fighting tooth and nail with them and wanted you to help me. I told them you were coming. It began with the socialist doctrine. You know, their doctrine. Crime is a protest against the abnormality of the social organization and nothing more. And nothing more. No other causes admitted. You are wrong there, cried Porfiry Petrovitch. He was noticeably animated and kept laughing as he looked at Razumihin, which made him more excited than ever. Nothing is admitted, Razumihin interrupted with heat. I'm not wrong. I'll show you their pamphlets. Everything with them is the influence of environment and nothing else. Their favorite phrase, from which it follows that if society is normally organized, all crime will cease at once, since there will be nothing to protest against and all men will become righteous in one instant. Human nature is not taken into account, it is excluded. It's not supposed to exist. They don't recognize that humanity, developing by a historical living process, will become at last a normal society. But they believe that a social system that has come out of some mathematical brain is going to organize all humanity at once and make it just and sinless in an instant, quicker than any living process. That's why they instinctively dislike history. Nothing but ugliness and stupidity in it. And they explain it all as stupidity. That's why they so dislike the living process of life. They don't want a living soul. The living soul demands life. The soul won't obey the rules of mechanics. The soul is an object of suspicion. The soul is retrograde. But what they want, though, it smells of death and can be made of India rubber at least, is not alive, has no will, is servile, and won't revolt. And won't revolt. And it comes in the end to their reducing everything to the building of walls and the planning of rooms and passages in a phalanstery. The phalanstery is ready, indeed, but your human nature is not ready for the phalanstery. It wants life. It hasn't completed its vital process. It's too soon for the graveyard. You can't skip over nature by logic. Logic presupposes three possibilities, but there are millions. Cut away a million and reduce it all to the question of comfort. That's the easiest solution of the problem. It's seductively clear, and you mustn't think about it. That's the great thing. You mustn't think. The whole secret of life in 2 pages of print. Now he is off, beating the drum. Catch hold of him, do, laughed Porfiry. Can you imagine? He turned to Raskolnikov. 6 people holding forth like that last night in one room, with punch as a preliminary. No, brother, you are wrong. Environment accounts for a great deal in crime. I can assure you of that. Oh, I know it does. But just tell me, a man of 40 violates a child of 10. Was it environment that drove him to it? Well, strictly speaking, it did. Porphyry observed with noteworthy gravity. A crime of that nature may be very well ascribed to the influence of the environment. Razumihin was almost in a frenzy. Oh, if you like, he roared, I'll prove to you that your white eyelashes may very well be ascribed to the church of Ivan the Great's being 250 feet high, and I will prove it clearly, exactly, progressively, and even with a liberal tendency. I undertake to. Will you bet on it? Don't. Let's hear, please, how he will prove it. He is always humbugging. Confound him, cried Rezumehin, jumping up and gesticulating. What's the use of talking to you? He does all that on purpose. You don't know him, Rodion. He took their side yesterday simply to make fools of them. And the things he said yesterday, and they were delighted. He can keep it up for a fortnight together. Last year, he persuaded us that he was going into a monastery. He stuck to it for 2 months. Not long ago, he took it into his head to declare he was going to get married, that he had everything ready for the wedding. He ordered new clothes indeed. We all began to congratulate him. There was no bride, nothing, all pure fantasy. Ah, you are wrong. I got the clothes before. It was the new clothes, in fact, that made me think of taking you in. Are you such a good dissembler? Raskolnikov asked carelessly. You wouldn't have supposed it, eh? Wait a bit. I shall take you in, too. No, I'll tell you the truth. All these questions about crime, environment, children recall to my mind an article of yours which interested me at the time. On crime or something of the sort. I forget the title. I read it with pleasure 2 months ago in the periodical review. My article in the periodical review? Raskolnikov asked in astonishment. I certainly did write an article upon a book 6 months ago when I left the university, but I sent it to the weekly review. But it came out in the periodical, and the weekly review ceased to exist, so that's why it wasn't printed at all at the time. That's true, but when it ceased to exist, the weekly review was amalgamated with the periodical, and so your article appeared 2 months ago in the latter. Didn't you know? Raskolnikov had not known. Why, you might get some money out of them for the article. What a strange person you are. You lead such a solitary life that you know nothing of the matters that concern you directly. It's a fact, I assure you. Bravo, Rodya. I knew nothing about it either, cried Rezumehin. I'll run today to the reading room and ask for the number. 2 months ago. What was the date? It doesn't matter though. I will find it. Think of not telling us. How did you find out that the article was mine? It was not only signed with an initial. I only learned it by chance the other day. Through the editor. I know him. I was very much interested. I analyzed, if I remember, the psychology of a criminal before and after the crime. Yes, and you maintained that the perpetration of a crime is always accompanied by illness. Very, very original. But it was not that part of your article that interested me so much, but an idea at the end of the article which I regret to say you merely suggested without working it out clearly. There is, if you recollect, a suggestion that there are certain persons who can, that is, not precisely are able to, but have a perfect right to commit breaches of morality and crimes, and that the law is not for them. Raskolnikov smiled at the exaggerated and intentional distortion of his idea. What? What do you mean? A right to crime? But not because of the influence of environment, Resumehin inquired with some alarm even. No, not exactly because of it, answered Porphyry. In his article, all men are divided into ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary men have a life in submission, have no right to transgress the law because, don't you see, they are ordinary. But extraordinary men have a right to commit any crime and to transgress the law in any way, just because they are extraordinary. That was your idea, if I am not mistaken. What do you mean? That can't be right, Resumehin muttered in bewilderment. Raskolnikov smiled again. He saw the point at once and knew where they wanted to drive him. He decided to take up the challenge. That wasn't quite my contention. He began simply and modestly. Yet I admit that you have stated it almost correctly. Perhaps, if you like, perfectly so. It almost gave him pleasure to admit this. The only difference is that I don't contend that extraordinary people are always bound to commit breaches of morals, as you call it. In fact, I doubt whether such an argument could be published. I simply hinted that an extraordinary man has the right, that is, not an official right, but an inner right to decide in his own conscience to overstep certain obstacles and only in case it is essential for the practical fulfillment of his idea, sometimes perhaps of benefit to the whole humanity. You say that my article isn't definite. I am ready to make it as clear as I can. Perhaps I am right in thinking you want me to. Very well. I maintain that if the discoveries of Kepler and Newton could not have been made known except by sacrificing the lives of one, a dozen, 100 or more men, Newton would have had the right, would indeed have been in duty bound to eliminate the dozen or 100 men for the sake of making his discoveries known to the whole humanity. But it does not follow from that Newton had a right to murder people right and left and to steal every day in the market. Then I remember I maintain in my article that all, well, legislators and leaders of men, such as Lycurgus, Solon, Mahomet, Napoleon, and so on, were all without exception criminals. From the very fact that, making a new law, they transgressed the ancient one, handed down from their ancestors and held sacred by the people. And they did not stop short at bloodshed either. If that bloodshed, often of the innocent persons fighting bravely in defense of the ancient law, were of use to their cause. It's remarkable, in fact, that the majority, indeed, of these benefactors and leaders of humanity were guilty of terrible carnage. In short, I maintain that all great men, or even men a little out of the common, that is to say, capable of giving some new word, must from their very nature be criminals. More or less, of course. Otherwise, it's hard for them to get out of the common rut. And to remain in the common rut is what they can't submit to from their very nature again. And to my mind, they ought not, indeed, to submit to it. You see that there is nothing particularly new in all that. The same thing has been printed and read 1,000 times before. As for my division of people into ordinary and extraordinary, I acknowledge that it's somewhat arbitrary. But I don't insist upon exact numbers. I only believe in my leading idea that men are in general divided by a law of nature into two categories: inferior, ordinary. That is to say, material that serves only to reproduce its kind, and men who have the gift or the talent to utter a new word. There are, of course, innumerable subdivisions, but the distinguishing features of both categories are fairly well marked. The first category, generally speaking, are men conservative in temperament and law abiding. They live under control and love to be controlled. To my thinking, it is their duty to be controlled because that's their vocation, and there is nothing humiliating in it for them. The second category, all transgress the law. They are destroyers or disposed to destruction according to their capacities. The crime of these men are, of course, relative and varied. For the most part, they seek in very varied ways the destruction of the present for the sake of the better. But if such a one is forced for the sake of his idea to step over a corpse or wade through blood, he can, I maintain, find within himself in his conscience a sanction for wading through blood. That depends on the idea and its dimensions. Note that it's only in that sense I speak of their right to crime in my article. You remember, it began with the legal question. There is no need for such anxiety, however. The masses will scarcely ever admit this right. They punish them or hang them, more or less, and in doing so fulfill quite justly their conservative vocation. But the same masses set these criminals on a pedestal in the next generation and worship them, more or less. The first category is always the man of the present, the second, the man of the future. The first, preserve the world and people it. The second, move the world and lead it to its goal. Each class has an equal right to exist. In fact, all have equal rights with me. And vive la guerre éternelle. Till the New Jerusalem, of course. Then you believe in the New Jerusalem, do you? I do, Raskolnikov answered firmly as he said these words, and during the whole preceding tirade, he kept his eyes on one spot on the carpet. And and do you believe in God? Excuse my curiosity. I do, repeated Raskolnikov, raising his eyes to Porphyry. And do you believe Lazarus is rising from the dead? I do. Why do you ask all this? You believe it literally. Literally. You don't say so. I asked from curiosity. Excuse me, but let us go back to the question. They are not always executed, some, on the contrary, triumph in their lifetime. Oh, yes, some attain their ends in this life and then they begin executing other people. If it's necessary, indeed, for the most part, they do. Your remark is very witty. Thank you. But tell me this, how do you distinguish those extraordinary people from the ordinary ones? Are there signs at their birth? I feel there ought to be more exactitude, more eternal definition. Excuse the natural anxiety of a practical, law abiding citizen, but couldn't they adopt a special uniform, for instance? Couldn't they wear something, be branded in some way? For you know, if confusion arises and a member of one category imagines that he belongs to the other, begins to eliminate obstacles as you so happily expressed it, then, oh, that very often happens. That remark is wittier than the other. Thank you. No reason to. But take note that the mistake can only arise in the first category, that is, among the ordinary people, as I perhaps unfortunately called them. In spite of their predisposition to obedience, very many of them, through a playfulness of nature, sometimes vouchsafed even to the cow, like to imagine themselves advanced people, destroyers, and to push themselves into the new movement, and this quite sincerely. Meanwhile, the really new people are very often unobserved by them or even despised as reactionaries of groveling tendencies. But I don't think there is any considerable danger here, and you really need not be uneasy, for they never go very far. Of course, they might have a thrashing sometimes for letting their fancy run away with them and to teach them their place, but no more. In fact, Even this isn't necessary as they castigate themselves, for they are very conscientious. Some perform this service for one another, and others chastise themselves with their own hands. They will impose various public acts of penitence upon themselves with a beautiful and edifying effect. In fact, you've nothing to be uneasy about. It's a law of nature. Well, you have certainly set my mind more at rest on that score. But there's another thing that worries me. Tell me, please, are there many people who have the right to kill others? These extraordinary people. I am ready to bow down to them, of course, but you must admit it's alarming if there are a great many of them, eh? Oh, you needn't worry about that either, Raskolnikov went on in the same tone. People with new ideas, people with the faintest capacity for saying something new, are extremely few in number, extraordinarily so, in fact. One thing is clear that the appearance of all these grades and subdivisions of men must follow with unfailing regularity some law of nature. That law, of course, is unknown at present, but I'm convinced that it exists and one day may become known. The vast mass of mankind is mere material and only exists in order by some great effort, by some mysterious process, by means of some crossing of races and stocks, to bring into the world at last, perhaps, one man out of 1,000 with a spark of independence. One in 10,000, perhaps. I speak roughly, approximately, is born with some independence and with still greater independence, one in 100,000. The man of genius is one in a million, and the great geniuses, the crown of humanity, appear on earth perhaps one in many thousand millions. In fact, I have not peeped into the retort in which all this takes place, but there certainly is and must be a definite law. It cannot be a matter of chance. Why are you both joking? Razumihin cried at last. There you sit, making fun of one another. Are you serious, Rodya? Raskolnikov raised his pale and almost mournful face and made no reply. And the unconcealed, persistent, nervous, and discourteous sarcasm of Porphyry seemed strange to Razumihin beside that quiet and mournful face. Well, brother, if you are really serious, you are right, of course, in saying that it's not new, that it's like what we've read and heard 1,000 times already. But what is really original in all this, and is exclusively your own to my horror, is that you sanction bloodshed in the name of conscience, and excuse my saying so, with such fanaticism that I'll take it is the point of your article. But that sanction of bloodshed by conscience is, to my mind, more terrible than official legal sanction of bloodshed. You are quite right. It is more terrible, Porphyry agreed. Yes, you must have exaggerated. There is some mistake. I shall read it. You can't think that. I shall read it. All that is not in the article, there's only a hint of it, said Raskolnikov. Yes, yes, Porphyry couldn't sit still. Your attitude to crime is pretty clear to me now, but excuse me for my impertinence. I am really ashamed to be worrying you like this. You see, you've removed my anxiety as to the two grades getting mixed, but there are various practical possibilities that make me uneasy. What if some man or youth imagines that he is a Lycurgus or Mahomet, a future one, of course, and suppose he begins to remove all obstacles? He has some great enterprise before him and needs money for it, and tries to get it. Do you see? Zametov gave a sudden guffaw in his corner. Raskolnikov did not even raise his eyes to him. I must admit, he went on calmly, that such cases certainly must arise. The vain and foolish are particularly apt to fall into that snare, young people especially. Yes, you see? Well then, what then? Raskolnikov smiled in reply. That's not my fault. So it is. And so it always will be. He said just now, he nodded at Razumihin, that I sanction bloodshed. Society is too well protected by prisons, banishment, criminal investigators, penal servitude. There's no need to be uneasy. You have but to catch the thief. And what if we do catch him? Then he gets what he deserves. You are certainly logical, but what of his conscience? Why do you care about that? Simply from humanity. If he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake. That will be his punishment as well as the prison. But the real genius is, asked Razumihin, frowning, those who have the right to murder. Oughtn't they to suffer at all, even for the blood they've shed? Why the word ought? It's not a matter of permission or prohibition. He will suffer if he is sorry for his victim. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and deep heart. The real great men must, I think, have great sadness on earth, he added dreamily, not in the tone of the conversation. He raised his eyes, looked earnestly at them all, smiled, and took his cap. He was too quiet by comparison with his manner at his entrance, and he felt this. Everyone got up. Well, you may abuse me, be angry with me if you like, Porfiry Petrovitch began again. But I can't resist. Allow me one little question. I know I'm troubling you. There is just one little notion I want to express, simply that I may not forget it. Very good. Tell me your little notion. Raskolnikov stood waiting, pale and grave, before him. Well, you see, I really don't know how to express it properly. It's a playful, psychological idea. When you were writing your article, surely you couldn't have helped fancying yourself just a little an extraordinary man uttering a new word in your sense. That's so, isn't it? Quite possibly, Raskolnikov answered contemptuously. Razumihin made a movement. And if so, could you bring yourself in case of worldly difficulties and hardship, or for some service of humanity, to overstep obstacles, for instance, to rob and murder? And again he winked with his left eye and laughed noiselessly, just as before. If I did, I certainly should not tell you, Raskolnikov answered with defiant and haughty contempt. No, I was only interested on account of your article from a literary point of view. Fool! How obvious and insolent that is, Raskolnikov thought with repulsion. Allow me to observe, he answered dryly, that I don't consider myself a Mahomet or a Napoleon, nor any personage of that kind, and not being one of them, I cannot tell you how I should act. Oh, come on. Don't we all think ourselves Napoleon now in Russia? Porfiry Petrovitch said with alarming familiarity. Something peculiar betrayed itself in the very intonation of his voice. Perhaps it was one of these future Napoleons who did for Anna Ivanova last week, Zametov blurted out from the corner. Raskolnikov did not speak but looked firmly and intently at Porfiry. Razumihin was scowling gloomily. He seemed before this to be noticing something. He looked angrily around. There was a minute of gloomy silence. Raskolnikov turned to go. Are you going already? Porfiry said amiably, holding out his hand with excessive politeness. Very, very glad of your acquaintance. As for your request, have no uneasiness. Write just as I told you, or better still, come to me there yourself in a day or two. Tomorrow indeed. I shall be there at 11 o'clock for certain. We'll arrange it all. We'll have a talk. As one of the last to be there, you might perhaps be able to tell us something, he added with a most good natured expression. You want to cross examine me officially in due form? Raskolnikov asked sharply. Oh, why? That's not necessary for the present. You misunderstand me. I lose no opportunity, you see, and I've talked with all who had pledges. I obtained evidence from some of them, and you are the last. Yes, by the way, he cried, seemingly suddenly delighted. I just remember what I was thinking of. He turned to Razumihin. You were talking my ears off about that Nikolay. Of course I know. I know very well. He turned to Raskolnikov. That the fellow is innocent, but what is one to do? We had to trouble Dmitri too. This is the point. This is all. When you went up the stairs, it was past 7, wasn't it? Yes, answered Raskolnikov with an unpleasant sensation at the very moment he spoke that. He need not have said it. Then, when you went upstairs between 7 and 8, didn't you see in that flat that stood open on the second story? Do you remember? Two workmen, or at least one of them. They were painting there. Didn't you notice them? It's very, very important for them. Painters? No, I didn't see them. Raskolnikov answered slowly as though ransacking his memory, while at the same instant he was racking every nerve, almost swooning with anxiety to conjecture as quickly as possible where the trap lay, and not to overlook anything. No, I didn't see them, and I don't think I noticed a flat that was open. But on the fourth story, he had mastered the trap now and was triumphant. I remember now that someone was moving out of the flat opposite to Lona Ivanova's. I remember it clearly. Some porters were carrying out a sofa and they squeezed me against the wall. But painters? No, I don't remember that there were any painters, and I don't think that there was a flat open anywhere. No, there wasn't. What do you mean? Razumihin shouted suddenly as though he had reflected and realized. Why, it was on the day of the murder that the painters were there at work, and he was there 3 days before. What are you asking? Fool, I have muddled it. Porphyry slapped himself on the forehead. Deuce, take it. This business is turning my brain, he addressed Raskolnikov somewhat apologetically. It would be such a great thing for us to find out whether anyone had seen them between 7 and 8 at the flat, so I fancied you could perhaps have told us something. I quite muddled it. Then you should be more careful, Razumihin observed grimly. The last words were uttered in the passage. Porfiry Petrovitch saw them to the door with excessive politeness. They went out into the street gloomily and sullenly, and for some steps they did not say a word. Raskolnikov drew a deep breath. Chapter 6. I don't believe it. I can't believe it, repeated Razumihin, trying in perplexity to refute Raskolnikov's arguments. They were by now approaching Bakaliev's lodgings, where Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Donia had been expecting them a long while. Razumihin kept stopping on the way in the heat of discussion, confused and excited by the very fact that they were for the first time speaking openly about it. Don't believe it then, answered Raskolnikov, with a cold, careless smile. You were noticing nothing as usual, but I was weighing every word. You are suspicious. That is why you weighed their words. Certainly. I agree. Porphyry's tone was rather strange, and still more that wretched Zametov. You are right. There was something about him. But why? Why? He has changed mind since last night. Quite the contrary. If they had that brainless idea, they would do their utmost to hide it and conceal their cards so as to catch you afterwards. But it was all impudent and careless. If they had had facts, I mean real facts, or at least grounds for suspicion, then they would certainly have tried to hide their game in the hope of getting more. They would have made a search long ago. Besides, but they have no facts, not one. It is all mirage, all ambiguous, simply a floating idea. So they try to throw me out by impudence. And perhaps he was irritated at having no facts and blurted it out in his vexation. Or perhaps he has some plan. He seems an intelligent man. Perhaps he wanted to frighten me by pretending to know. They have a psychology of their own, brother, but it is loathsome explaining it all. Stop. And it's insulting. Insulting, I understand you. But since we have spoken openly now, and it is an excellent thing that we have at last, I am glad. I will own now, frankly, that I noticed it in them long ago. This idea. Of course, the merest hint, only an insinuation. But why an insinuation, even? How dare they? What foundation have they? If only you knew how furious I have been. Think only, simply because a poor student, unhinged by poverty and hypochondria, on the eve of a severe delirious illness, suspicious, vain, proud, who has not seen a soul to speak to for 6 months, in rags and in boots without soles, has to face some wretched policemen and put up with their insolence and the unexpected debt thrust under his nose. The IOU presented by Ralph, the new paint, 30 degrees, Mure, and stifling atmosphere, a crowd of people, the talk about murder of a person where he had been just before, and all that on an empty stomach. He might well have a fainting fit, and that is what they found it all on. Damn them. I understand how annoying it is, but in your place, Rodya, I would laugh at them, or better still, spit in their ugly faces, and spit a dozen times in all directions. I'd hit out in all directions, neatly too, and so I'd put an end to it. Damn them. Don't be downhearted. It's a shame. He really has put it well, though, Raskolnikov thought. Damn them. But the cross examination again tomorrow, he said with bitterness. Must I really enter into explanations with them? I feel vexed as it is that I condescended to speak to Zametov yesterday in the restaurant. Damn it, I will go myself to Porphyry. I will squeeze it out of him as one of the family. He must let me know the ins and outs of it all. And as for Zametov, at last he sees through me, thought Raskolnikov. Stay, cried Razumihin, seizing him by the shoulder again. Stay, you were wrong. I have thought it out. You are wrong. How was that a trap? You say that the question about the workmen was a trap, but if you had done that, could you have said you had seen them painting the flat and the workmen? On the contrary, you would have seen nothing, even if you had seen it. Who would own it against himself? If I had done that thing, I should certainly have said that I'd seen the workmen and the flat, Raskolnikov answered with reluctance and obvious disgust. But why speak against yourself? Because only peasants or the most inexperienced novices deny everything flatly at examinations. If a man is ever so little developed and experienced, he will certainly try to admit all the external facts that can't be avoided, but will seek other explanations of them, will introduce some special unexpected turn that will give them another significance and put them in another light. Porphyry might well reckon that I should be sure to answer so, and say I had seen them to give an air of truth, and then make some explanation. But he would have told you at once that the workmen could not have been there 2 days before, and that therefore you must have been there on the day of the murder at 8 o'clock. And so he would have caught you over a detail. Yes, that is what he was reckoning on, that I should have time to reflect and should be in a hurry to make the most likely answer, and so would forget the workmen could not have been there 2 days before. But how could you forget it? Nothing easier. It is in just such stupid details clever people are most easily caught. The most cunning a man is, the less he suspects that he will be caught in a simple thing. The more cunning a man is, the simpler the trap he must be caught in. Porphyry is not such a fool as you think. He is a knave, then, if that is so. Raskolnikov could not help laughing, but at the very moment he was struck by the strangeness of his own frankness and the eagerness with which he had made this explanation, though he had kept up all the preceding conversation with gloomy repulsion, obviously with a motive from necessity.